And we're now being joined by Alison Federica, who is the Director of Analysis at Geopolitical Futures from Washington, D.C. Alison, do you think this Ukraine's biggest drone strike on Russia is going to be the turning point as far as the Ukraine-Russia war is concerned?
I think it is going to be a turning point for the negotiations in terms of changing the battle cadence that we're seeing in the various fronts inside Ukraine itself. I don't think that it's going to have that much of an impact on the day-to-day fighting that we've been seeing in the past few weeks leading up to the talks. However, the attacks themselves will give Ukraine a little bit more leverage in that they can confidently walk in and say, hey, we've done these attacks on you. Look at what we are capable of when they go to sit down to speak with Russia. And it will also create a little bit more pressure on Russia politically in the sense that they have to now explain how were these attacks even possible in the first place, that they had such vulnerabilities in their deep interior.
Also, Alison, what does the loss of 40 aircrafts, which were strategically important, they were strategic bombers, mean for Russia's, military?
So there's a few different short and medium and long-term impacts that it will have. It Russia still has other ways of launching attacks and missiles into Ukraine. So the fact that it will still be able to do some sort of attack on Ukraine will be there. Obviously, these particular planes will no longer be available. It will definitely hurt morale in terms of just seeing a strike of that scope. And it's also going to be difficult to recover. So replacing all of these planes is going to cost a lot of money, but the government has already spent billions and billions of dollars funding this war in the first place. And when they're looking at their budget to keep the military operation in Ukraine going until talks can reach some sort of conclusion, and when they're looking at how do they keep their wartime economy afloat, they didn't calculate this level of damage to their military that's going to take years to rebuild.
Absolutely. And also, can this drone attack be seen as a bold leadership move or a dangerous provocation from Ukrainian side?
I think it is a move by Ukraine to try to give them the best possible position that they can going into negotiations. Both sides are running out of time in terms of their ability to keep on fighting for various reasons. But Ukraine has the weaker position going into these talks. So being able to show Russia that it can attack deep inside its territory, to be able to create internal problems for Russia, will give it a better chance at getting some concessions in the talks that are scheduled to happen today in India time, tomorrow for me. But it's I wouldn't call it a provocation because these two sides are already at war. So there's been plenty of provocations to this date, and it's more about positioning to get the best possible negotiation status.
And also, could this level of escalation, end up in a broader regional conflict?
So I don't think it could end up in a broader regional conflict. One, because the target itself is inside Russia. So the two major parties involved here, Russia and Ukraine, are still the two major parties involved here, Russia and Ukraine. If they can prove that somehow NATO partners were behind this with intelligence, that might complicate things. However, at this point, NATO has been very careful to avoid getting directly involved in the conflict. And Russia, for its part, has also been careful in trying not to do anything that would force NATO's hand to get involved in the conflict. So both NATO and Russia would like to see things remain a Ukraine and Russia conflict. And the way this attack has occurred up till now, from what we know, isn't going to change the main parties that are involved.
Alison, do you also think Ukraine has redefined modern warfare with this drone attack on Russia?
I think that drones have redefined modern warfare. There's been other locations that have used drones prior to the Ukraine conflict. Ukraine has obviously made a great example of the use of drones. Turkey has used drones and produces them to a large degree. We've seen Houthis use drones effectively in the Middle East. The range of these drones is notable. However, it's important to note that the reason they were so successful deep inside Russian territory is because they were physically brought there. Nevertheless, the types of defense systems that are going to be needed by modern militaries in terms of detection, defense for drone activity is going to be paramount because we are seeing this shift coming, and it's only been getting more and more sophisticated in terms of the types of technology that can be used in drones.
All right, Alison, do stay with us. We have some reactions coming in on the story that we're tracking. Let's listen in.
Готували операцію більш ніж 1,5 роки. Планування, організація, всі деталі були ідеально підготовлені. Можна сказати впевнено, що це абсолютно унікальна операція. Найцікавіше, і вже зараз це можна говорити публічно, офіс нашої операції на території Росії знаходився безпосередньо поруч з управлінням ФСБ Росії в одній з їхніх областей.
Alison, coming back to you, how does the United States view this drone attack by Ukraine on Russia?
The U.S. hasn't really said too much about this publicly. We do know that Secretary of State Rubio spoke with Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov about this, and that he did send condolences for some of the victims that occurred in the train attacks as well. What the U.S. wants to see is an end to the conflict for its own personal reasons. There is an interest in having things end. So while they can understand perhaps where Ukraine is coming from on this, what they don't want to see is a protracted conflict. So as long as this is going to be framed with talks as a way to gain leverage and try to increase their position going into these talks, as opposed to completely derail them, the U.S. is going to have that viewpoint. I know that the government has flip-flopped a little bit in the terms of how it's talked about Putin, how it's talked about the Russian side of this conflict. But at the end of the day, what Washington wants is to have the fighting stop, have some sort of political resolution reached, and be able to kind of close this chapter.
All right, Alison, do stay with us. So ahead of the peace talks in Istanbul, Ukraine has launched a massive offensive against Russia, escalating tensions between the two warring nations. After keeping Russia and Turkey in suspense, Ukrainian President Zelenskyy has confirmed that his defense minister would represent the country in the second round of peace talks with Russian officials. However, Zelenskyy has firmly stated that Ukraine will not compromise on its independence. He has also called for a full unconditional ceasefire. In fact, he has called for the release of prisoners by Russia as well. On the other hand, Russia has stated that it has already formulated its peace terms but won't reveal them ahead of the talks. Meanwhile, Russian media has reported that the Russian delegation is en route to Istanbul. Remember, the talks in Turkey follows a push from US President Donald Trump, who wants this war to end as soon as possible.
Росіяни свій меморандум так і не передали нікому. У нас немає, турецької сторони немає, також у американської сторони російського документу немає. Попри це, ми спробуємо досягти хоча б якогось прогресу на шляху до миру.
And Alison Federica continues to stay with us. Alison, do you think the Ukraine's biggest drone attack on Russia has undermined its own call for a ceasefire?
I don't think it has undermined its own goal for a ceasefire, because the goal of that attack, I believe, was to send a message to Russia that they have capabilities and that Russia needs to take Ukraine seriously when they both meet at the negotiation table. I don't think even before these drone attacks occurred that the talks that are occurring on June 2nd are going to lead to the be-all, end-all agreement here. What both sides want to do is set the terms for engagement for further talks. And so being able to say, hey, we can attack you into your territory, we can pose a threat, will give Ukraine a little bit more leverage when speaking with the Russians. At the same time, Russia has also shown that it can attack Ukraine without problems as well. And so it's more about, how do we enter into these talks? What concessions is each side willing to give in order to reach some sort of ceasefire or understanding, so that they can lay the base work and have more intense talks on how to actually end the conflict?
Alison, on one hand, Ukraine claims that with this attack, Ukraine wants to have a strong position as far as the ceasefire talks are concerned. But on the other hand, Russia is saying that they have already set their terms for the ceasefire.
That is accurate, but that's part of the negotiations. So both sides are going to come in with their red lines, their non-negotiables. Then they will have a list of topics where maybe they could offer some concessions or be a little bit more flexible depending on what the other side says. We don't know what the Russian terms are. Like any good negotiator, you don't show all of your cards at the beginning of the talks. So there is space for there to be some sort of discussion, and no side is going to admit publicly before the talks what the possible flexibility might be or what the possible concessions might be. So both sides have made it clear that they want a ceasefire. Now the question is, how do we get to that point?
But Alison, can an unconditional ceasefire be realistic when both the sides are, escalating militarily on the ground?
So I don't think it will be unconditional, but that's why we have to have the negotiations and the talks. Whatever they agree on for some type of ceasefire will be predicated on certain preconditions that both sides will agree to. We've already seen a ceasefire for a very short period of time. So it's possible that we'll see another one of a short period of time that, has conditions on it of how long it's going to last or what activity might be there. There may also be other types of conditions that we haven't really talked about publicly yet that both sides are considering. But the idea that both sides are going to say, okay, no matter what, we're just going to stop is unrealistic.
So, Alison, can this also become a pattern, like diplomacy on one track and drone warfare on the other?
That's entirely the point. This is a carrot stick approach, if you will, where you want to have the diplomacy succeed. You want to be able to bring an end to the conflict. But at the same time, no one's going to take you seriously if you don't have some weight behind you. So when you go into those negotiations, you need to be coming in from a position of strength or the strongest position possible given your situation. So the idea of conducting attacks, which Ukraine did, and also Russia did prior to the Ukraine drone attacks, both sides are trying to project strength and say, you know what, we have military options available going into these talks. Take us seriously. Let's see if we can come to some sort of understanding with each other, but have also made it clearly known if for some reason these talks don't work out, they are more than capable and willing to continue the conflict militarily.
All right, Alison, do stay with us. Let's listen in to what Zelenskyy said on the drone attack.
Загалом в операції було використано 117 дронів і відповідна кількість операторів дронів працювали. Вражено 34% стратегічних носіїв крилатих ракет на аеродромах базування. Діяли наші люди на території різних російських регіонів в 3 часових поясах. І наших людей напередодні операції з території Росії вивели. Зараз вони в безпеці. Готували операцію більш ніж 1,5 роки. Планування, організація, всі деталі були ідеально підготовлені. Можна сказати впевнено, що це абсолютно унікальна операція. Найцікавіше, і вже зараз це можна говорити публічно, офіс нашої операції на території Росії знаходився безпосередньо поруч з управлінням ФСБ Росії в одній з їхніх областей.